Hi, everyone. I'm Astral Marmot, and I'm here to talk about something very interesting: boredom. When I run a game, I think it's pretty normal that I want it to be exciting. Not every session has to be life or death, obviously, but ideally, every session engages the players enough that they stay immersed in the narrative. This isn't always the case, though. Sometimes players get bored. And in Dungeons and Dragons, at least, that boredom usually centers around two things: a lack of stakes and a lack of variety. I want to explore both of these within the context of D&D. I also want to talk about where your responsibility for managing player boredom ends and how specifically to help neurodivergent players manage their attention at the table. And I want to start by talking about the two things that, when I posed the question of what bores you the most in D&D to Reddit, came up over and over again: combat and shopping. Let's start with combat, and let's start by asking, why do so many people find combat in D&D boring? Is there something inherent to D&D's mechanics that make it a slog? Well, kinda. Yeah. Switching from real-time action to turn-based action creates an immediate halt to momentum, and the entire table has to readjust to a new mode. That new mode is also highly mechanical, requiring math and dice to mediate actions and damage. Anytime lots of mechanics are involved, the game is going to slow down. People have to wait their turn, and waiting is boring. Despite having to wait, each player has to be ready for their turn, and there's a baseline expectation that everyone knows the rules and their own character sheet well enough to take action quickly. Some of these things can't be fixed because they're just inherent to the system. All we can do is work around them, or play in other systems that don't have these problems. Some of these things can be mitigated, however. How to make combat interesting has been covered by a lot of YouTube videos before, and so rather than doing an exhaustive deep dive, I'm just going to touch briefly on the highlights. First of all, there's a difference between keeping combat interesting and keeping combat short, but there is a direct relationship between the two, and you as game master should be aware of both. When it comes to keeping things snappy, take the average hit points for monsters. It's a small thing, but it saves time rolling. Tell players what the enemy's AC is after a round. This way they know if they hit or miss and can keep the ball rolling. Keep track of initiative in a way that's visible to your players so they can prepare. When it's someone's turn, announce to the next person in order that you're on deck. If your players struggle with taking too long with their turns, you may want to try a timer. I've personally never used one. I worry that it might place too much pressure on the players. But from what I've heard, keeping turns to a minute or so adds an element of excitement to the game and keeps combat moving quickly. If a player is truly egregious in taking their turn, tell them you're moving forward and they can go next in initiative. If it gets really bad, just skip their turn for the round. This is harsh, but chances are you won't have to do it more than once. Now, when it comes to keeping combat interesting, there are a lot of great tactics out there. First of all, have secondary goals. If the only goal of your combat is kill the enemy, that can get boring fast. Add goals for the players like capturing an enemy, freeing an NPC, or stopping a ritual from taking place. This feeds the need for variety and forces players to think strategically and focus on more than dealing damage. Give it a time limit. That ritual will take 4 rounds to complete. You have to reach the cultist before the clock runs out. That gives stakes to an otherwise standard encounter. Use the environment. I mean this in two senses: both environmental hazards like traps or lava, and giving the players and enemies interesting things to interact with. Add terrain that they can climb on or use for cover. Give enemies verticality. Get your players and their enemies moving across the map. Make your enemies fight smart, including running away rather than fighting to the death. I recommend the excellent blog The Monsters Know What They're Doing for advice on how to run monsters strategically. Finally, use music. It adds tension and excitement. I'll link the track that I use for combat in the description. Going through this list made me realize how much of keeping combat interesting centers on movement. You want the PCs moving around. You want the enemies moving around. If it makes sense, you want the environment moving too. Whatever you can do to encourage movement in a combat scenario is going to make the encounter more memorable and exciting. Shopping is a whole different kettle of fish, and it's a real catch-22. On the one hand, shopping rarely advances the plot, can eat up a ton of game time, and often comes down to watching one player haggle over 5 pieces of imaginary gold. On the other hand, loot is a huge part of the game, and gold is a big part of loot. Players want something to spend that gold on, and shopping is the way they do it. How do we find our way out of this problem? First, you don't have to roleplay every shopping experience. As a rule, I try to only roleplay shopping if it's plot relevant, dangerous, or funny. Plot relevant could be as loose as "this shopkeep knows important information," or as direct as "this shopkeep is the BBEG and just runs an antique store on the side." So how do I handle the boring shopping that also needs to happen? Simple. I create inventory lists in advance and send them to the players to review and tell me what they want in between sessions. This saves a ton of time in-game, and it takes time pressure off the players to make decisions quickly. If there's a specific item I know they're looking for, I'll just make sure to include it on the list. This only works because I set reasonable prices and my players know that they don't need to haggle to get a fair deal. Unless haggling is something everyone, and I do mean everyone at your table enjoys doing, I recommend trying a no haggling rule and just setting fair prices and giving discounts as the party's renown increases. It's also worth considering other uses for the party's gold, such as having a stronghold they can invest in. And finally, try to make shopping a moment. Give the shopkeep a personality, a personal mission, and an interesting quirk. Once, inspired by a Drawfee episode, I created an armorer named Uncle Pants the Pantsmith. Uncle Pants once tried to cast a wish spell for a permanent Mordenkainen's mansion, but it went awry and now he's stuck in his shop and cursed to refer to everything in his inventory as pants. He wasn't plot relevant, but my players loved to visit him, and I'd let them roleplay their hearts out when they did, because every interaction with him was a moment. Everything we've discussed so far involves action on the Dungeon Master's part. But D&D is a multiplayer game, and every person who plays it is responsible for managing their own engagement level. We expect players to know their abilities, pay attention when the spotlight isn't on them, and generally engage with the world in good faith. Collectively, we call these table norms, the guidelines for how we all behave in this collective space. These norms will and must differ between every table that's ever played. One purpose they serve at my table is to create a distraction-free space that still allows people to be humans. What works at my table is no cell phones, they're too much of a temptation, no social media, way too much of a distraction, no games other than the one we're playing, like please don't play Baldur's Gate during our game, yes to taking breaks, I do a break after 2 hours, yes to fidget toys, non-distracting ones of course, yes to doodling and making art, especially game-related art, and yes to food because you gotta keep your energy up. It's also important to set table norms for player behavior in-game. What works for my table is know your character sheets and abilities, be ready on your turn, pay attention to other players' turns, ask questions about the environment and situation, think strategically, and try new things. Some of these seem obvious, but let me underscore this point. Never take table norms for granted. State them explicitly, up front, ideally before your game even begins. Reddit's RPG horror stories is full of people who assumed a player or GM understood the basics of human decency and then demonstrated the exact opposite. Now, your mileage may vary with any of these norms. Some may find making art while playing too distracting, for example, while many people I know say it helps them to focus. Now, I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody with powerful ADHD. Maybe having something for your hands to do is less important to other people. But if you have or are a neurodivergent player, you'll understand the importance of finding the balance between soothing and distracting. Everyone is different, so get to know your players and ask what their needs are. And let me emphasize again, every player with neurodivergence is different and will require different things. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. If your players have trusted you enough to share their diagnosis with you, have a one-on-one conversation and ask, are there any accommodations you need to help you pay attention during the game? And if you notice them struggling at the table, care about them as a human being first. Have they had enough to eat? Are they getting enough sleep? Did something happen to throw them off their game? This kind of regular communication with your players, neurodivergent or otherwise, is only going to make your game better in the long run. And if you're a neurodivergent player, maybe leave a comment about what helps you when you're playing. Sharing that kind of information helps our community to grow. Boredom at the table is, ironically, very interesting. It's a universal experience, and it's the last thing we want when we sit down to play. Boredom in D&D speaks to issues with game design as well as the fundamental human problem of staying interested in something for 4 hours straight. I hope the strategies I've gone over can help you keep shopping interesting, keep combat from being a slog, and keep your players fully engaged throughout your sessions. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my supporters on Ko-Fi.com for helping to keep this channel alive. If you want to become a supporter or commission me to run a game for you, you can follow the link in the description to do so. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share this video. I'm a small channel and every little bit helps. Thanks again for being here. Go get yourself a glass of water, and may your games forever be riveting for you and your players both. And unclench your jaw.